Today I want to show you how I take suckers from my tomato plants and turn them into new plants. So I'm basically going to be propagating this tomato plant. Now you want to make sure that the tomato plant you're using is an indeterminate variety. That basically means it's a vining tomato. A determinate variety won't have suckers on it. You can still propagate from them, but you're not going to get a plant that fruits unless you take half the plant, like you cut the main stem. You could take that top half and plant that, and that'll make a new plant, and then you could possibly have two plants that turn into fruiting plants. But if you start to cut off arms on a determinate tomato plant, you're not going to get a fruiting plant. You'll still get a plant, but it won't fruit. So the arms, this is what the arm looks like on a plant. It kind of comes to a point. It really doesn't look like it has any kind of crown. The suckers will grow sort of in the elbow of an arm and the main stem. So this little guy right here, that's a little baby sucker. Now that one's a little too small for me. You could still propagate that one and it will grow a lovely plant. I like to get them a little bit bigger. Now it's been a while since I've pulled my suckers off of my plants. So this is another sucker here. You can see this is the arm. Let me get in closer. This is the arm. This is the main stem. This is the sucker. So this one's a big old sucker. And you could tell which one's the suckers because, especially when they're already big, because they'll have their own little crown and their own arms. So to take this off, you could snap it off with your fingers. I like to use cutters because I don't want to damage the plant. I don't want to, sometimes if you break them off with your fingers, it'll end up taking a strip of your main stem, and then you have to kind of wait for that to scar. Well, I don't want to risk this plant getting any extra diseases or possibly damaging too much of that stem and then the top half of my plant dying, so I just cut them off. And I'm just going to use my cutters here. So I'm just really careful, and it really doesn't matter too much where you cut them because they'll root just about anywhere on that stem. All right, so this is what it looks like. Now I don't need all these arms on here, so I'm actually going to be cutting this arm off here and this arm off here, and then I will be planting this really deep into a pot of really moist soil. Alright, so I've got this little pot that I'm reusing with some soil in there, and I use soil that doesn't have peat moss. I'm just poking holes so I could stick my suckers in there. So I don't use peat moss when I do this because I really am trying not to use peat moss in my growing, just because there's all those issues with wetlands disappearing, and I don't want to really take part in that, so I'm trying to not use it like I used to use it before. So now what you're going to do is you're going to grab your sucker and you're going to stick it down in that hole and kind of just make sure you pack it really firmly around the base of each sucker. So it's really, really easy, and you really don't need to keep this many leaves on your sucker. I like to, just because I find that tomatoes root really quickly, and you really don't need to trim off too much. I just trim off the bottom ones, but I find that you don't really need to trim off too much because they end up doing just fine. And I'll show you some that I've already done about 2 weeks ago, and you guys can kind of see how they've rooted. So it's not difficult at all. It's really, really easy. It's a great way to get free plants. And if you prune your tomatoes heavily like I do, this will be a fun project for you because I find that sucker tomato plants end up needing a little bit more pruning. And I say pruning because they tend to be less of a bushy plant, so you kind of have to do a little bit of pruning early on to keep them nice and bushy. And you'll just plant this once this is ready and it's rooted. You can plant this right away and just plant them deep like you normally would with your tomato plants. So this is another, this is actually the same variety. This is a BeefSteak tomato plant. I took these suckers out a few weeks ago, and I'm sure that they must have rooted by now. Yep, look at that. So this was about, yeah, I would say about almost 3 weeks ago. So these are doing really, really well. I've just moved them into full sun. I was keeping them in the shade. You don't have to keep them in the shade if you're planning on watering them every day, but I keep mine in the shade so I don't have to water them as often. But for the first 7 to 10 days, you want to make sure that you keep the soil really moist. And I'm actually going to backfill these up a little higher because I want them to be filled up all the way. But that's pretty much all you do, and you get some free tomato plants.